McLaren's rear wing is now illegal. They're going to change it. So the questions we have are, why was it legal in the first place? Were they really cheating? And how does that affect Oscar's performance in Baku? Here we go. Okay, before we get into qualifying for the Singapore Grand Prix this weekend, there are just a couple of things that we needed to clear up about this rear wing on the McLaren. So you'll have hopefully watched our video on the legality or illegality of that wing a couple of days ago, almost immediately after the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. And there was a lot of talk then about whether or not the mini DRS that McLaren were using was actually illegal. And if it was, why were the FIA not doing anything about it? Well, we've got to Singapore, we've got through FP1, FP2, and McLaren have agreed to modify their rear wing so that it no longer has that mini DRS effect. So that leaves us with three questions, I think. The first is, how did a wing that was legal in Azerbaijan, Spa, and Monza suddenly become illegal as we get into Singapore? Second, were McLaren actually cheating? And third question is, how does that now paint Oscar's performance in Baku, which we waxed so lyrically about before? So let's hit that first question first. How was a wing that was legal before illegal now? So we're going to look at some technical regulations, some articles. It's super dull, but I'm going to try and break it down for you as easily as it possibly can be. Right, so the technical regulations, Article 3.2.2 talks about aerodynamic influence, right? So it says, with the exception of the driver adjustable bodywork, that's the DRS, all aerodynamic components or bodywork influencing the car's aerodynamic performance must be rigidly secured and immobile with respect to their frame of reference. So essentially that's saying that any bit of bodywork that isn't the DRS has to be strapped down and cannot move, right? But we know that that's not really possible, right? That's not, if all of the surfaces on a Formula One car were completely rigid and did not move, as the car moves through the air and the forces that are applied to it, those things will break. So there has to be a little bit of give. So the FIA has a series of tests. This is the test that is defined for the rear wing, right? This is Article 3.15.10, rear wing flap flexibility. The rear wing flap may deflect no more than 7 millimeters horizontally when a 500 Newton load is applied horizontally. Now, remember, that is a static load test, right? So the cars just sit there static and this load is applied. That load is meant to simulate an impact or a crash because the car fundamentally just has to be safe. So that is really why those load tests are there. They're not there necessarily to test whether or not a car is compliant with Article 3.2.2. So that leaves a bit of a grey area, doesn't it? So what McLaren have done is they have passed that load test, and the FIA initially have been happy that that load test, the passing of it, was enough to satisfy Regulation 3.2.2, because you can't have it completely rigid, otherwise it will break, but it has to be safe. So it passes the load test. So then the question comes into whether or not that amount of flexibility is allowed or not. So there's another little article here. So as part of 3.2.2, it says this: the aerodynamic influence of any component of the car not considered to be bodywork must be incidental to its main function. Any design which aims to maximize such an aerodynamic influence is prohibited. I.e., we accept as the FIA that some of these bits of bodywork will flex, including the rear wing flap. But you can't have the intention that the flap flexing will aid performance. It's incidental. It happens because air is moving over it. You can't do anything about it because it has to flex a little bit. You can't induce that flex on purpose to gain an advantage, right? So the FIA, up until Baku, by the sounds of things, have been satisfied, even though they can probably see on previous rearward facing cameras that that rear wing has been flexing, has been affording the McLaren that DRS effect. And we know that Red Bull have been protesting this 3 times, according to Helmut Marko. But the FIA was satisfied that the load test was passed and that McLaren weren't doing this on purpose. How do you gauge that though? How do you sort of say whether somebody is intending to do something or not? Well, that's how I think a, a legal wing has suddenly become illegal because the FIA have changed their minds and have thought, actually, no, we don't think it's incidental. We think you're doing it on purpose. And therefore, they've changed their minds and have insisted or encouraged McLaren to change their rear wing. That's where we're at the moment. That's why a legal wing has now become essentially illegal and will need to be modified. So that brings us to our next question. Were McLaren cheating? This, I think, is where it gets a bit murky. We said before on our last video that number one, we thought the wing was legal, which it was at that point, up until the point that the FIA decided that they didn't think it was legal. But if you look at the rule and you look at the test, perhaps there's a bit more nuance to this. So let's go back to that rule again. So the rule says that the aerodynamic influence of any component of a car not considered to be bodywork must be incidental to its main function, i.e. we're allowed a little bit of flex, but you can't flex it on purpose, right? And it also says aerodynamic components or bodywork influencing the car's aerodynamic performance must be rigidly secured, right? So you put those two things together and you have to somehow prove that there was an intent for that bit of bodywork to flex on purpose. Now, McLaren have tacitly admitted that by saying that they'll modify the rear wing. Perhaps that's by somebody pushing on them and saying, look, you're going to have to do it, or McLaren freely admitting that they had a performance enhancing part on their rear wing. Now, either way, there's a rule that says you can't move stuff unless it's just by accident. But you've just changed something because it was moving and you knew it was moving. Is that cheating? I'm going to put this another way, right? Are you creating a part that is legal, i.e. adheres to Article 3.2.2, or are you creating a part that just satisfies the load test, which is really just there for safety? Because it's kind of like you're doing your driving test. Now, in the UK, the first part of your driving test is done in a test center. So you do it in front of a computer. It's a closed book test. You can't have a textbook with you. Now, if the test center says you're not allowed to have your textbook on your lap, but we've got a CCTV camera that is monitoring you to check that you're not using that textbook, if you find a way to have the textbook printed on your jeans or hidden away underneath the desk so that the CCTV camera can't see you, well, you've still used the textbook, which you're not allowed to do. You've just hidden it from the CCTV. So is that okay? Because that's essentially what McLaren have been doing. They've kind of gone, well, we know that this part flexes and gives us an aerodynamic advantage, but we've passed the load test, which is how you monitor things. So is that okay? And I would argue that if you're being strictly pernickety about the whole thing, well, kind of is cheating, isn't it? You knew you were going to get an aerodynamic advantage from having a flexible rear wing flap. You saw that there was a load test that needed to be passed, and you just played to the load test, knowing that you were still going to pass, knowing that you were still going to get an advantage from your flexible rear wing. So look, there's a lot of articles out there that have come out in the last 24 hours that have kind of said, no, 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 it's not cheating. It's definitely not cheating. They passed all the load tests. The FIA said it was okay. And that's true. The FIA did say it was okay. So from that point of view, you could argue they weren't cheating. But strictly, there was a rule. They disobeyed that rule just passed the test, knowing that they was breaking that rule. That's cheating. Sorry, McLaren. Um, I don't make the rules. I just look at the numbers and join up the dots. So anyway, that's kind of what I think. And then the final thing is, okay, well, now that we're here where we're here, how does that affect Oscar's performance in Baku? Like, do we have to reassess that a little bit? Well, maybe. I've heard different things. I've heard one YouTube channel say that there was a 6 kilometer per hour advantage from having that DRS flap open. I've heard somebody else say that it's about a tenth of an advantage over the course of the lap. I guess the bottom line is that the DRS, the mini DRS advantage is not as big as the actual DRS advantage. So Oscar got past on a move that was still of his own making. That was still a superlative move. The question we're now asking is, did Leclerc stay behind Oscar purely because Oscar had this mini DRS on his car? Well, I think that the bare facts are that the DRS, having full DRS, which Leclerc had lap after lap after lap for 30 laps, is more powerful than the mini DRS effect that Oscar would have been getting. So it stands to reason that although the McLaren would have had a bit of an advantage, it wasn't more of an advantage than Leclerc having the DRS. So Oscar still had to do a lot of work. And you still saw that despite Charles saying, oh, I never got a run on him. Well, he did. He had 5 attempts and Oscar just placed his car really well to stop Charles from getting around the outside of him. So I think the bottom line is, yes, it was probably a bit of an advantage, but I don't think it was enough to explain how Oscar kept Charles behind him for lap after lap after lap after lap. That was still racing instinct and racing guile. So, nah, I still think Oscar did the job. So, put all that together, we've got a legal wing becoming illegal because the FIA have changed a little bit how they're viewing that that flex that the wing is able to have. I do think that, strictly speaking, McLaren were cheating. Do with that what you will, but I do think Oscar's performance was still top draw. Anyway, that's it. That's my analysis. Enjoy qualifying. We'll try and join you guys afterwards. We'll do a little bit of analysis again, hopefully some telemetry. If you like what we're doing here, please like, please subscribe, please leave us a comment. We read all of them and we reply to as many as we possibly can. We will see you guys in the next one.